So is our sense of right and wrong hardwired into us from the very beginning, or is it something we just kind of absorb from our culture and the people around us? Think about the moral architecture of your own mind for a second. How did it actually get built? In today's Explainer, we're going to dive right into the fascinating psychological frameworks, the cultural lenses, and the really tough real-world ethical dilemmas that shape human morality. Let's get into it. To get our ethical compasses perfectly calibrated, I want to hit you with a high-stakes dilemma straight from our source material. Imagine you're a teacher. You receive a very real death threat demanding that you pass a student who absolutely, without a doubt, does not deserve it. What do? Do you prioritize your own safety, or do you uphold the principle of justice no matter the cost? Keep your gut answer in mind because we are going to circle back to this exact scenario later to see how different moral frameworks tackle it. All right, here is our roadmap for today's Explainer. First, we'll look at how morality actually develops. Second, the hierarchy of values. Third, the Filipino value system. Fourth, professional ethics and dilemmas. And finally, building a humane society. Okay, Section 1. How morality actually develops. So there was this psychologist named Kohlberg, and he was totally fascinated by how children react to moral dilemmas. He proposed that moral reasoning isn't just a switch, something you either have or you don't. It's actually a progression. It's like we climb this invisible ladder of moral adequacy, starting way down at basic self-centered survival instincts and slowly moving all the way up to really complex, principled, universal ethics. Kohlberg basically broke this down into 3 distinct levels. At level 1, the pre-conventional stage, morality is entirely driven by consequences. Kids behave simply to avoid getting in trouble or to get a reward. Self-interest completely runs the show here. Then we hit level 2, the conventional stage. And honestly, this is where most adults operate day to day. At this level, morality is all about conforming to societal rules, meeting expectations, and just doing your duty to keep social order intact. Finally, you have level 3, the post-conventional stage. At this top tier, your actions are guided by personal conscience and universal ethical principles, things like human rights and abstract justice, even if those principles directly clash with the law. But, Kohlberg's model didn't go unchallenged. Carol Gilligan came along and pointed out a pretty major flaw. His initial studies were based almost entirely on male subjects. She argued that this led to an ethics of justice framework, which is super focused on abstract rules and laws. So Gilligan proposed an alternative she called the ethics of care. She brilliantly illustrated that moral reasoning can also be fundamentally based on preserving relationships, showing empathy, and fulfilling our responsibilities to other people. And the takeaway here isn't that one is right and the other is wrong. They just represent different, equally vital dimensions of the human moral experience. Moving right along to Section 2, the hierarchy of values. So, when push comes to shove, how do we internally rank what actually matters most? Philosopher Max Scheler gave us a brilliantly structured hierarchy for exactly this. Down at the base, we have pleasure values. These are the things that satisfy our basic physical desires. Just above that, you've got vital or welfare values. This is stuff pertaining to the well-being of the individual and the community, like health and vitality. Then we step up to spiritual or cultural values. Now we're talking about justice, truth, and the beauty of art and knowledge. Finally, at the absolute peak, Scheler places values of the holy. These are our ultimate religious or spiritual fulfillments. Every time we make a tough choice, we're usually trading a lower value on this list for a higher one. Let's apply this. Section 3, the Filipino value system. Anthropologist F. Landa Gicano has this fantastic quote. There are no negative Filipino values. There are only wrong uses of the values. What a spectacular lens for looking at human behavior, right? It teaches us to impartially frame cultural traits, not as inherently good or evil, but as double-edged swords. The outcome depends entirely on how the value is applied in a given context. Let's look at some real examples of this duality. Let's contrast 2 deeply ingrained cultural behaviors. On the incredibly positive side, we have bayanihan. This is the beautiful, unifying spirit of shared community cooperation, literally people coming together to lift each other up. But then you have the darker mirror to this, known as kanya-kanya, or what's often called crab mentality. This is a segmented, super selfish attitude where individuals actively pull each other down just to secure their own spot at the top. The fascinating thing, both stem from a deep focus on the community. But one builds the community up and the other completely fractures it. Here's another really interesting duality. Extreme personalism places a massive premium on personal relationships and blood ties. When it's used correctly, it creates incredible loyalty, deep familial support, and a society that truly takes care of its own. But if this value gets misused in, say, a professional or governmental setting, it morphs straight into nepotism. If you're judging situations by relationships rather than rules and fairness, you completely counteract justice and, well, you basically invite corruption through the front door. And then we have bahalana. This phrase is misunderstood so often. An outsider looking in might view it as lazy fatalism, just resigning to mediocrity, or a complete lack of foresight. But if you look deeper into the culture, bahalana actually represents a courageous willingness to take risks and face the unknown head on. When it gets paired with malasakit, which translates to deep concern or care, it becomes the driving force behind incredible acts of everyday heroism. It's taking a leap of faith, but doing it for all the right reasons. Which brings us to Section 4, Professional Ethics and Dilemmas.
All right, get a load of this scenario from the text. A student knows a huge exam is coming up, but instead of putting in the arduous preparation and actually studying, they spend their time playing computer games and then spend hours praying for a miracle to pass. How do we categorize this kind of behavior through the lens of values?
Well, this is categorized as treating religion as magic. Remember Max Scheller's hierarchy we just talked about, where holy values are sitting right at the very top? This is a prime example of a profound value being completely misused. Instead of using faith as a guide for moral character, the student is using religious practices as a psychological crutch to basically dodge personal effort. It's a complete evasion of responsibility. Let's look at another one. A teacher is fully aware of the illegal activities of a neighbor. However, they consciously choose to keep quiet just to avoid getting involved in any investigation or drama. Is this an ethical choice? We are seeing a really intense conflict here between self-preservation, which remember is a very basic Kohlberg level 1 instinct, and their ultimate duty to society. By staying silent, that teacher is failing to apply a foundational principle of morality. The end does not justify the means. Avoiding personal inconvenience is the end, but allowing illegal activities to continue harming the community by staying silent is the means. A truly morally mature person accepts responsibility for their choices, and they understand that passively allowing evil to happen is in itself an ethical failure. Now, let's return to that wild death threat dilemma we opened the explainer with. If you've received a threat demanding you pass an undeserving student, what's your move? There are two incredibly distinct paths here. A hedonist, someone operating purely on self-interest and avoiding pain, would just pass the student. No question. They prioritize their safety over literally everything else. But someone operating at Kohlberg's post-conventional stage, guided by universal ethics, they would refuse to pass the student. They understand that yielding to extortion destroys the integrity of the whole institution, and it fundamentally violates the principle of justice. All right, final part. Section 5, Building a Humane Society. So how do we actually build this stuff into society? Educational frameworks globally try to construct a solid moral architecture using UNESCO's 4 pillars of learning. See, education isn't just about learning to know facts or learning to do a specific job. It's vitally about learning to live together, fostering empathy, peace, and conflict resolution. But most importantly, it involves learning to be. This 4th pillar is absolutely crucial because it targets the complete ethical, emotional, and physical integration of a human being. It's about developing the whole person, not just a worker. But here is the ultimate, inescapable truth about values education. Values are caught, not taught. Just preaching at people is rarely enough. Our source material mentions this beautiful anecdote of a retired teacher who was branded an absolute terror by her school because she relentlessly inspected her students' nails, their clothes, their teeth. But her true motive was a heart completely full of compassion. She desperately wanted to instill human dignity and health in those kids. She didn't just stand there and lecture about cleanliness. She modeled accountability and care every single day. Children and adults alike absorb the values they witness in action. So I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought to chew on. If our actions really do speak so much louder than our words, and if values are truly caught by observation and not just taught through lectures, what kind of moral architecture are you building for the people watching you right now? Because make no mistake, every single choice you make is a lesson to someone else. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. I'll see you next time.